where we left off shortly before the break was we had been talking about the sheath, and you had been speculating, that this may have been some very fucked up like sexual fantasy, where then he dropped the sheath and became a monster and did this whole thing. But then after he kills Mogan and Kaylee up there, who again he may have found Kaylee unexpectedly, he then has to find a way out of the building.
He's got to exfil. He's got to get back out of this place, this complicated maze that still baffles me that, he made it through the structure. There's so much of this it's indicative of somebody that has at least paid attention to the layout of this place to the point where he can navigate in the dark, make his way through this place, and still get out and seemingly leave nothing behind but a knife sheath. Now, there was some talk at one point in time that there had been a bloody footprint that was left behind by maybe a van shoe, like Vans.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got a very distinctive pattern, may have been in blood. And again, we still don't know a lot about that other than the fact that one of the things that was pointed out was that there were other people in that house that wore Vans as well. So we don't know. Hopefully some of that's going to come out in the record as more and more of the stuff is being released, because even as we're talking right now, there's still wrangling that's going on about when there's going to be a major data dump, and seemingly, and it's kind of an interesting little aside. I've been covering this thing for so long. How long ago was it?
It was November 13th, 2022.
Yeah, no, I started then, but recently when Dateline did their Friday night show, that they did this big reveal. No offense to Dateline, I don't watch Dateline. I don't watch shows like this. No, it's just not my thing, man. So I wake up Saturday morning and turn on my phone, look at it, and I see that I'm tagged in an image, and it says, "Wow, obviously a fan of Joe Scott's," and my handle is like Joe Scott Forensics on X. Well, I'll look at it, and it is a screenshot from Dateline, and my image is on it. And my wife and I, as we always do, we're old. We sit there early in the morning and drink coffee together, and I'm like,
"You drink coffee?
Yeah,
I didn't know that."
What the shit? And I like showed, and immediately it's like she turned to ashen. It bothered her down to her core, because I'd been talking about this thing for so long in the news and this sort of thing. He, as it turns out, according to Dateline, in this data dump that they initially did, or this information that they acquired, he had been watching all of these shows that I was appearing on, and not just me, other people. And they had a digital record of this stuff that he had been viewing. And so it gave me a thought back to our earlier supposition that I put forward about, who's listening, who's watching. It really kind of made me pause for a second. I'm thinking, what did I say in that interim between when this went down back in November to the point that they finally put the bracelets on his ass? What had I said during that middle period? What did any of us say? Did we give him any kind of insight into, because, it was back then that I was saying, whoever did this, their car was like a rolling crime scene, because unless you covered the seats in some manner, which he may have, you're not going to be able to get out of this without leaving some remnant behind. It goes back to my forensic hero, Edmond Lacard. Every contact leaves a trace. That when you sit in this car, you're going to transfer certain elements into this environment, whether it be hair, skin, or blood. And, how do you get past that relative to these barriers that you have to create in order to ensure that you're not going to leave a trace of yourself in this vehicle. Because if you extend this line of logic out and you begin to think about, well, if he went so far to buy a Dickies outfit to cover himself with, and he's bought the balaclava, he has probably got gloves, he's going to walk into this environment. Did he take other precautions when he got into the car to shield the interior of the car? Well, by the time they finally get the car, which is another kind of infamous story, when, they raided the parents' house over in the Poconos, he's in there in his underwear and he's like wearing gloves and he's transferring trash all around the place, trying to bag it separately to keep things. He had apparently an awareness of the types of things that we did. I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm just saying what
perfectly normal behavior. If you're his family watching this, seems right.
What did I say anything in the interim that? And he's watching everything that's out there. He's been studying this for years and years. It did give me pause at that moment in time, though, to think about this.
I understand why you would have that because you're a deep thinking, very moral guy. But at the same time, it's like whenever a case like this goes down, once the unthinkable has happened, it's going to be reported on, and it's going to be speculated on everywhere. Someone's it's not even just the prisoner's dilemma of like, well, someone's going to do it. It's also like the public wants to know how these things happen, and then what do you mean you don't have the killer?
Yeah.
And then you have to explain, well, here's how you could hypothetically cover tracks and things like that. You're doing your job, and like if not to be harsh, but if the detectives and the FBI and all the resources on it aren't smart enough to be a half a step ahead of that, and a half a step only needs to be 3 hours sometimes, that's kind of on them.
Yeah, it is. And that was the big cry that went up. And what a lot of people don't understand about the Moscow Police Department, and I found this out really early on, you are supposed to pronounce it Moscow. Just like Costco,
they don't like
don't dig on Moscow, so it has to be Moscow. So I had to learn that. But anyway,
very, very aggressive.
So they're a department that is in total is about 24 people. Just let that sink in for a second. And so they're having to invite these other agencies in, whether it's the state police or certainly the feds, to give them a hand with this. I think that probably many of us that were kind of observing this, and certainly my colleagues in forensics, are thinking, well, have they done everything that they needed to do to lock this thing? I'm not talking about even processing the scene. I'm just talking about securing the scene until those that are at maybe a higher altitude can actually view this thing and begin to understand how to work your way through this to collect all of the evidence. First off, recognize it, preserve it, and then collect it after you've documented everything. Did they ensure that was going to happen? There were some troubling moments, I think, along the way. One of the biggest things that I guess it was probably 2 or 3 days afterwards, there was something that kind of struck me as odd that had occurred. The coroner from out in that jurisdiction gave an interview. And that's something that...
The coroner did?
Yeah, that's something that doesn't happen most of the time, because if you just envision, that's the way I describe it to my students, you have an investigative bubble, and there's really nobody that should penetrate that. And there are certain expectations of people that are within that environment of your responsibilities. And one of the biggest responsibility is don't say anything. And because you don't know if that's going to damage the case. Mm-hmm. And the coroner would have very intimate knowledge of walking in. Well, she had stated early on in the first interview that she gave that they were apparently all asleep. Well, as it turns out, they were not all asleep. As a matter of fact, nothing could be further from the truth. So I knew something was up when I heard that, and it makes you wonder about
what else they fucked up.
Yeah, what else had happened? We were that close. I say we. I'm not going to take personal possession of this thing, but it was that close to everything within that house being eradicated relative to evidence. Because before Kohberger was actually arrested, they had agreed to have a crime scene cleanup company come out and begin to purge this place. I guess they wanted to get it back on the market or whatever was going to happen because this thing was still privately owned. As a matter of fact, there is actually an image of a crime scene cleanup truck backed up to the door, and they have created a plastic cave to walk into this thing. They had just, I don't remember the exact date, but they had just hooked Kohberger up. And he had defense counsel for him in Pennsylvania. And they were like, whoa. We want our own people to come and take a look at this before you go through and clean this thing up, quote unquote. If they had done that. Yeah, I know. And that's how close it was. And that goes to the idea that, we could chase this rabbit all day long about tearing down the structure. Yeah. Which is something that has stuck in my craw and others.
Because they did it too soon?
I just don't think it was wise to do it at all. You wouldn't have any way of knowing, but Julian, I've worked a lot of homicides in my career, okay, between New Orleans and Atlanta. I don't ever recall over that period of time where I had a homicide scene that was in a structure where the structure had been razed, like just taken down to the ground.
Didn't they wait, they did that December 2023, though? They waited over a year. So you still think, because you're saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, because the case was ongoing at the time, it had not been adjudicated.
Yeah, and the only rationale they could give is that it creates bad memories and it makes people sad. I don't care. I don't care. It makes sense. I like to look at Parkland High School, and they put chain link fence around the thing and they locked it down. And one of the reasons was that they gave is they couldn't afford to provide security for it. And I'm thinking, and I know a bit more now, but one of the big issues with the structure, as we've talked about, is I think the acoustics in there. You begin to think about, what did people hear at any particular time? Do you recall that there was still a roommate that was downstairs?
Weren't there two? There was Dylan, and then there was
another
girl.
one that was on the parking pad.
What was her name? Emily?
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yeah.
I might have made that
and
up.
she was physically in there, and you're thinking, well, is it possible she could have heard something? And so if you ever even had a desire to take a jury out there, like they did with Parkland, which I'll never forget that day when they took the jury members out there, and they had the two representatives from the press corps that walked through it. That place was frozen in time. It was that important to them at that moment in time.
They did that with Murdoch, too.
Yeah, they did. They preserved everything. Yeah. And I've been involved in cases where the jury was taken out to scenes. It doesn't happen every time. It's a pain in the butt. Defense attorneys, prosecution hates it too, and this is why. Because if you're questioning somebody before a jury in this kind of protected environment, which court is, you control the dialogue. People that walk into an environment like this, you can't control their inner dialogue or what their assessment is. They're looking at everything and they're taking it all in, and you can't say yay or nay either way to them. They're observing this place, and I think that attorneys absolutely, they do not welcome these opportunities to take juries out there and revisit these places. So it just seemed as though that it was an unreasonable risk to take when there was no need to take that risk at all, that they should have just let the structure intact. And I never could balance that in my mind, but they took it down. They took it down to the ground, man. I mean, it's gone.
Yeah. I kind of wonder, Because that does make sense to me that you would wait until the case is over to do something like that. Because it also makes total sense that in the middle of a college campus where they're supposed to be happy kids in the time of their life, you know, you don't want something like this being there. That place is haunted. But it does make you wonder why they couldn't put like some sort of box fence around it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a 20-foot high Bin Laden kind of fence, just to be like, okay, just
Yeah, with concertina wire around the top of it. I don't understand. And it's not. Hey, look, man, it's your world. I'm just living in it. I don't understand why they did it. Maybe they have a better explanation, other than it made people sad.
Yeah. Which again, I get that for college kids, but you do it to your point, and I agree with you. You have to think about the bigger picture here.
You have to. You only get literally one shot at it.
Yeah.
And if this had gone sideways, at any point in time, I think that would be a point in time that they would. And look, they talk about the Faro system that they walked in with. That's FARO, where this thing shoots thousands and thousands of images per second. It gives you a detailed digital reconstruction of the scene. I'm not going to say it's like the holodeck on the Star Trek: The Next Generation, but they can recreate it.
Yeah.
And they create the doll houses that they'll bring in and kind of take the floors off bit by bit and kind of, but you'll never recapture what the place was actually like, in that sense. And I would think that you would want to have that in reserve. All right. It just seems like an unnecessary risk.
Now, what do we know? You had kind of gone through the possibilities of where you could enter this place earlier.
Yes.
And stuff like that. We went through the sliding doors. We had it up on the screen so people could see it as well. There's also the lower level up front where if it's unlocked, you get in there, or if someone knew the code, because all these kids knew the code, you get in there. But what do we... where do we assume he first gained entry right now?
The sliders.
I assume the sliders.
The sliders that's the second floor level that he parked up, probably behind. There's one way in, one way out.
So he pulled into the driveway.
Yeah, well, no, up behind, like up the hill behind, and then made his way back down the hill to the sliders, and he was able to enter through there.
And that's the vantage point where you could see into that third floor room from up there, whatever that is, that lot.
You're looking like this, and you're looking down that hill and into that third bedroom.
And that's a parking lot up there?
Yeah, it's an adjacent area up there where you can park your car and then turn around. You have to come back out.
Okay. All right, so he goes in there. As you've also laid out very well, this is a complex layout internally on the house, where the staircases are, where the hallways are, how you get from floor to floor. Once he comes downstairs and discovers Xana, and then therefore Ethan, and Ethan might have been, we don't know yet until they release all the information, he might have actually been the only one who might have been sleeping, but Xana definitely wasn't. Once he discovers her, begins to stab her and kill her, then whatever ends up happening, he ends up killing Ethan right there. I imagine that happens in a relatively quick period, meaning it didn't take 10 minutes for him to do that, but he finishes that. Where does he exit the house?
He comes back out through the sliders.
Also through the sliders.
And that's when Dylan would have seen him. When he is exiting, she talks about how he passed by her. And
passed by her door or passed by her?
Yeah, passed by her. Her door was open like this. She looked outside of the door, and she's the one that heard someone say, and I'm paraphrasing here.
There's someone here.
Well, that, and also, don't worry, I'm going to help you. And and that had been floating through the ether as well. So that in and of itself is troubling. And I've thought about this quite a bit relative to if we go with the idea that this is, first off, tinged with, a lot of anger and hatred, because there seems to be a lot of overkill here. If there's some kind of sexual thing that's going on where, and you don't have to have sex for it to be sexually motivated.
Right.
You just rip the person to shreds. After killing 4 people, the question is, why didn't he kill Dylan?
Yes.
I think that probably he was completely spent. This is an adrenaline pump that he is on at this point in time. He sat up there. He's got himself worked up. He goes in there. You can say worked up, aroused, whatever the case might be. I don't know. That's for brighter people than me to try to discover. But he goes in there, perpetrates this crime on the 3rd floor, and then he's surprised. That's another boost of adrenaline. Right at that point in time, he knows that they can't escape. If he's going to get away with this thing, he's going to have to do away with them. That is Xana and Ethan. Maybe she retreated to the room. She's found in her room. She's been killed. Ethan's been killed. Now he's going to try to get out. And apparently, as he is walking down the hall, he looks right at Dylan. That's when she sees this. And she refers to it as a guy. He's got really bushy eyebrows. He's kind of an athletic built, but he's not muscular. I think she described him as like a runner or swimmer type body.
Wearing a balaclava.
Well, she didn't say balaclava. All she said is he had a mask, and I could just see his eyes. She also made a reference at some point in time, or somebody picked up on this, that they thought he was carrying a vacuum cleaner. And I've heard, and when I say that, which seems so bizarre, some people have wondered if he had an evidence vac with him. And I'm thinking that's something that we use to gather things up, almost like a handy vac. Mm. And if you can't make anything else out, why would you say he had a vacuum cleaner? It seems very specific. And no one has ever been able to kind of prove that. I think that that's not what she saw. It was something else, maybe the knife he was still holding on to, certainly absent the sheath.
This girl, Dylan, got a lot of, and this is the problem with cases like this. When they instantly go viral socially, you get all these internet detectives all over it, and it takes on a life of its own that's beyond the facts of the case. And when you look at the timing, she wakes up the next day seemingly disoriented, like, I feel like something happened last night. I don't know. Calls her friend to come over. Friend comes over. Dylan is outside the house, and she's like, I don't know. Something might have happened in there last night. And then I believe that friend's boyfriend is the one that went in and first discovered them and came out and called the police. And so people are like, well, how the fuck could you not call the police at 4 a.m. in the morning when you thought someone was in the house, and even when you saw them? In your experience dealing with criminal cases, though, and dealing with people who are shell-shocked at scenes, and, something like this is completely incomprehensible to them, do you see that in your opinion, is a lot of the behavior or, the way it went down from Dylan's perspective, and particularly even going down in the basement with the other roommate, pretty, I don't want to say normal, but pretty in line with...
There's nothing normal within this world. I've interviewed people in the past that were bordering on catatonia, where they've got the 1,000-yard stare.
Yep.
They're vibrating like this, and the fact that your brain may bear witness or something, or maybe your brain is creating scenarios that something awful has happened, and it just kind of goes into protection mode. And this is not like, we're talking about a college kid here that's never probably seen a drop of angry blood spilt, okay? And she's in this environment. There's no telling how anybody is going to react.
Right.
So the fact that this happened, to me, is not surprising at all. The troubling thing about it, though, is that you've got this gigantic window of time that has now elapsed from the moment that those souls departed this earth to the first time police put their eyes on their remains. And me, one of the things that we examine, or that we try to glean information from, are the bodies relative to postmortem changes.
Right.
And so that's going to skew data. And of course, time is very important here. Time is what this case is all about. When were these particular markers hit? And then you kind of go into this zero zone here where nothing seems to be happening, but yet the bodies are still changing at this point in time. Body temperature is dropping, rigor setting in, livor mortis is setting in. How are you going to be able to assess that? Well, by the time the coroner gets out there, the coroner will not have arrived immediately. They're still going to be even further down the timeline. So any kind of data that you're trying to establish that might help you to really zone in on the times. Thankfully, they kind of have these digital markers, like with the food delivery and all these sorts of things. But and certainly the CCTV of the girls at the food truck, that gives you kind of a back end time. But going into the front, if you're trying to adjust this to try to understand the changes that have happened, your data is really going to be skewed.
It makes it hard.
Yeah, it does.
For sure. The thing, and you actually mentioned it, unrelated, when we were talking about them raising the house.
Yeah.
And therefore you couldn't go in there and understand the sound and stuff like that. But that's the thing that really is so hard for me to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my explanation is that someone is in a scared catatonia and they don't know what's real and what's not, which I think is a perfectly good explanation. However, if someone weren't in that, what makes it hard to understand is how, for example, someone like Xana, who is awake and has fight back marks, which means she probably screamed.
Yeah.
And it was probably not once. It was probably a continued scream or whatever. The idea that you wouldn't hear something like that is hard for me to put it in the shoes of someone else who was in there and try to understand what it would be like to be catatonic and not even be able to hear. You know what I mean? It's very hard to process.
Yeah, it is. And again, we don't know. Well, if you just take the example of Xana, okay, and you think about the injury she sustained on her hand, which are not postmortem injuries. These happened in life. There are focal areas of hemorrhage, I would assume. They're talking about these being defensive injuries. They're very deep. And then to boot, you've got all of the stab wounds that are being inflicted upon her. We still don't know anatomically what the wound track is either. Did he actually nail an area in her body that would have pretty quickly incapacitated her, where she's not going to make a noise? Was she so shocked by what was happening to her she didn't cry out? Because you're thinking this is kind of gymnastics you do, because you're thinking, okay, we've got 4 souls in this house. You're telling me that out of these 4 individuals that you don't have somebody screaming at the top of their lungs. And again, thinking about the 2 roommates upstairs, how much alcohol did they have on board? Was there anything that was impeding their physical ability to respond? And again, we don't know.
Did he use a pillow too? You got to wonder that. Like you've seen, not even to get like Hollywood about it, but you see where people will sneak up on someone and
put his hand over their mouth.
Yep.
But how are you going to do that with 2 individuals? How's one individual not going to be aware that it's happening to the other? My fallback position is always, and I'm hoping that we're going to learn what the blood alcohol level is. How much alcohol did they have on board? They were ambulatory. It's not like that they were, passed out in an alley somewhere. I mean, they made it back home with that mystery driver that brought them home, who a lot of people were looking at early on thinking, and it was just kind of a goodwill gesture on that person's part to bring them home.
It was like the designated driver for the fraternity.
Yeah. And, he got them back to their domicile, and they're upright. They made it up to the 3rd floor, so it's not like they're just completely passed out or anything. And again, hopefully those answers will be revealed.
All right, so the getaway, though, because again, and you talked about it a little bit ago with the time in between when you're on TV and this guy is unknown and not caught yet. The getaway happens, and he doesn't get, I believe he doesn't get taken down until the week after Christmas. So it was like
New Year's Eve, I think.
Yeah, it was like 6 full weeks on the run.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, with what we have been given in public, they didn't start to look at him as a suspect until mid-December or something, so over a month after.
Yeah.
But he gets in his white Hyundai Elantra that he had turned off his phone when he was leaving Pullman, Washington. So his phone goes dark, but then his phone picks back up now somewhere just south of Moscow.
Yes.
And he takes a long, circuitous, like circle route
Yeah.
back to Pullman.
Yeah, he does. And one of the interesting things was that was offered up. I guess it was the defense attorney had put out there. Well, he went stargazing that night. Well, the weather report that night was that you had a low ceiling of about 300 feet. It was socked in essentially. There was ice, and there was one point that was away from the city. They claimed that he had an interest in astronomy, and that he just went out there to this isolated, lone location just so that he could gaze up at the stars. And I guess people would say, well, what's wrong with that? It's a free country. You can go do what he wants to do. Yeah, but when you couple that with the fact that the phone is off,
Mm-hmm.
and that he's allegedly gone to this location, I don't know, maybe he did go to that location. Maybe that's where the knife is. Maybe it's in the middle of a river out there, or beneath a rock in the middle of the river. We have no way of knowing, what happened in that interim period. What's really fascinating is that the next morning,
he comes back.
And that blows my mind. He pings outside the house at that point in time. But here's another little point along the continuum. If you go back from there, they had his phone moving around that house, I think 11 or 12 times in the weeks, leading up to this point, which always has kind of captured my imagination. Again, you're talking about surveilling an area, trying to understand the comings and goings, and who occupies the space, and then to fail so desperately at this when it comes time to do it, because you're after one person, apparently, allegedly, but yet you don't account for the other three people that are going to be in the house, but yet you've spent all of this time, the super villain here that is surveilling the area, and he's picking out all the points of ingress and egress and all these sorts of things. And he's got this, he's got his Dickies on, and he's got his knife that he's gotten off of Amazon, and so forth and so on. And he's being so very careful. You think about all of that, and how did you screw it up this bad? Well, he certainly did. The one thing that kind of really threw a wrench into this whole process is that when the police took a loop themselves. There's like a big, I can't remember what the distance is, like 15 or 20 miles. They took a loop around potential routes where they went to every convenience store, church, anybody that had a camera. And a couple of times they did catch what appeared to be a white Elantra that was going past, but it was going so fast you couldn't make out any kind of details on the driver. The FBI tried to frame it, because they're good at this, framing make and model of the vehicle, and they were able to narrow it down to like a 3-year period. But you couldn't see the license plate on the car either, and so it took some time before they actually wound up lighting back on him as a suspect.
Now, you said he was there like 11 times in the weeks,
11,
something like
12,
that.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that data, were we able, I assume, to ping where the car sits and he's just sitting there? Meaning the phone data shows that it's still...
I'm assuming, I don't have that information,
Okay.
but I'm assuming that would probably, because most of the time when these things begin to ping like this, it'll show movement. And if it's hitting right there and it stays there for a protracted period of time, I would think that they could do whatever it is that they do relative. They talk about geofencing and all these sorts of things.
So there's two big mistakes that from my very amateur seat stand out right away. Number one, he left the sheath there. Number two, the get to and getaway and the build up before where he's visiting there even with the cell phone data, very bad at covering your tracks on both sides of it. However, getting into the house, as you said, complex structure, seems to have known it very well, was able to effectively neutralize everything in his way with the exception of Dylan, which you speculated could be because he was spent at that point. So unfortunately, he went in there, and even if he intended to kill one person, was able to have enough time and wherewithal to kill 4, which made it even way worse than it was to begin with. If he went there, though, with the car 11 times ahead of time, I wonder if, this is a college house. People are in class during the day. They don't lock it. I got to assume he went in there.
Is he a creeper? Yeah. I mean, would he have the ability to go in there? Because, I've thought about this, thinking about just trying to size this place up. If people were common, even strangers, to this location, and you happen upon one of the roommates, hey, I thought this was Mary's house or whatever. He happens to be in there. Oh, no. There's no Mary that lives here. And he's off. Well, I don't know. Maybe one of them had seen him there at some point in time. I don't know if that ever happened. But would he have the intestinal fortitude to do that beforehand, or did he just hang out on the periphery? Because if he's a burgeoning sex offender, with this complex thing that's going on with his psychopathology, did he get in there to try to take trophies? And I'm thinking about clothing, anything like that, any kind of garment that might belong to her. Well, there was nothing, to my knowledge at least, that was found at his apartment, Pullman, that would give that indication, because some of these people like to do that. And again, people throw around the term serial killer. To the best of my knowledge, he's not a serial killer. He is a mass killer. And I don't know if that was his purpose. Some people point at the knife to say that, well, this is something he wanted to hold on to. It's like a carpenter loving the finishing hammer that they always use. Well, if you suppose that this was the first time out, did it prove to be all that he wanted and more as far as an instrument of death? Well, it certainly worked well at that point in time, but why would he... Did he begin to feel the heat of this and decided, in that 6-week period, did he decide to get rid of the knife somewhere else where it might never be found? Who knows? I have no idea.
He drove across the country. I mean,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, with Daddy in tow. Yeah, I mean, for all I know, he drove up to the Snake River and threw it in there. I have no idea. And that's going to be an interesting question. But, the thing about it, though, Bubba, is that this guy's not being made to allocute, and for me, it's incredibly bothersome, particularly when you consider what he has put these families through, because essentially he has out and out lied about everything.
They were trying to come up with up a week before.
Yeah,
or someone else.
It's actually like 3 days before he actually copped to it. He has been lying the entire time, but yet they're not going to put him in a position where he is being forced to say precisely what he did. And it just seemed to me that you could leverage this agreement by saying, okay, you have to stand up there and do this, just like BTK.
Yep.
Just like Jodi Arias, you have to stand up there and say what you did, and you have to tell everybody what you did.
And why, effectively.
Well, yeah, you could ask him why and the motivations. But, this is what I think. I think that he's probably so twisted. First off, at the time of this recording, he has not appeared in court. However, I think I would be surprised if he did say anything about what his motivations were or anything like that. It seems to me, because he had studied these killers for so long, he still probably views himself on some level as some half-ass academic. And he wants to call the shots relative to when he's going to make any kind of statement. And trust me, there will be a whole line of people that will want to talk to him. And there will be people from academia that will want to talk to him under the guise of saying, well, we just want to study him for the benefit of everybody else. And they'll write papers about him, and he'll have full attention here. And all along, these families are absent their babies for the rest of eternity.
Why did they make this deal? Like that's what I don't understand. Like, if they made the deal where he then had to allocute, it makes sense. But to make a deal, I mean, the Gonzalez family is very upset about it. And listen, I think it's like 2 of the families are upset about it, and the other 2 are like, it's over. We're putting it behind us. We're glad to have the actual case not have to whatever. And they may still be. I don't know this for a fact. They may still be very disappointed it's not allocuting, but all in all, they're trying to do the best they can to move on with their lives after this. But the families who are upset about this, I fully understand that. And I don't understand the logic unless the case was for some reason they felt like weak and like he might get off on some of it. Why would they make this deal in your opinion?
Well, he's got 5 charges, okay? First charge he's got is felony burglary, which is, and in the charging document itself, you can actually see this online. It talks about, again, this is me paraphrasing, burglary for the purpose of committing murder, okay? And then for each child that was butchered, there's an individual charge for them. I don't know how much whittling down you could do of that, or offer up any kind of alternatives as far as sentencing or anything like that, because it is what it is. He planned to go in there and do this. Now, maybe if he came forth and said, yeah, Maddie was my target, I was surprised by the rest of them. Maybe that would be the one big charge that they had, and they would reduce everything else. I have no idea. I don't know if they felt as though that it was, bird in hand is the kind of view that they were taking of this. But up until that point when he entered the plea, he was proclaiming his innocence, and he was saying that he was not guilty. And all of a sudden he has this come to Jesus moment where he says, oh, no, I did it. Don't believe me? Go look at the tape. He's standing there. He confesses to every bit of it, or at least says that he did this. Now, he doesn't give an explanation. I don't know that we'll ever have an explanation. That's going to be for a lot of people to kind of jaw jack over for, forever and ever, amen, until the next one of these kind of tragedies happens. But either way, I think that it's less than, probably for certain family members, probably less than satisfying, I would think.
Hard for me to even try to imagine that, like what I might be thinking.
Yeah, well, this is the thing about it. There will be witness impact statements, and I'm going to be watching this very carefully. I can tell you from my perspective. I do hope, my heart of hearts, I do hope that the families are given every bit of the information about what happened to their children, if they haven't had it already, and that they have somebody that has aided them in writing out a statement. And I don't care if it takes 2 days to do it or 3 days to do it. That now they cannot directly address him. They address the court, because you see people in impact statements will turn sometimes and look at the accused.
They're not allowed to do that?
No, they're going, because the witness impact statement is supposed to actually impact the judge in making their decision about what they're going to do as far as punishment goes and those sorts of things. That's the purpose of it. But I do hope that as they are addressing the court, that they will be armed. I hope that the prosecution will have armed them with sufficient amount of information so that if he's not going to allocute, by God, the family is going to be able to state in open court that this is what, according to this is what you did to my kids, and you are admitting to this. This is what you did to my child. And they'll be able to hold forth on that and hold him accountable, at least to some degree. Because I still don't think that we understand the depth and the breadth of how violent this was. One thing that people always point out is that image that comes from the scene, where you've got what appears to be, and I'm not the forensic scientist that handled it. I can't say definitively that is blood, but people have said that that's blood trickling down the wall onto the foundation of the house. It comes out of the walls, and you can see it right there. It looks like blood, but forensically, we can't look at something and say that is blood. You have to test it.
Right.
But that gives you an idea of what type of bloodbath this may have been inside of that house. And if it's presenting outside the structure, you can only imagine what the interior of the house looked like.
Yeah, we have that image up right now. Joe's got that. That's on the outside.
That's on
as
the
you
outside.
said.
That's the foundation right there.
All right. Now, the judge, when he was arrested at the end of December 2022, and then had like the first hearings or whatever, the judge put the gag order on this case. And prior to that, prior to him being caught, the detectives were very limited with what they released on details because they were in the chase of him, and they didn't,
Right.
I guess didn't want to give certain things away, even about the crime scene itself and what it looked like. And so we've gotten from some court documents since then that I guess are publicly available, we've gotten some detail of what went down. But the way I'm understanding is that we still, like, they're basically going to data dump on us after this is done, where they release everything. And we're going to actually, for the first time, just tell me if this is fair to say, understand exactly what that crime scene looked like.
The depth and breadth of it. Yeah, I think so. And the media is a big piece to this. They've pushed for this for some time. And you can say what you will about what their interests are here. Obviously, if it bleeds, it leads. And they will generate multiple articles about this after that data dump takes place. I will be contacted. They'll ask me to give comment about interpretation of it. What do I think? What can I draw from it? And that's all going to happen. But at the end of the day, it's not going to change a damn thing. These kids were still butchered. But we will have more detail. I think can I just say right now, one of the things that has really troubled me about this case is at his point of origin, we're talking about a kid a grown man, that is a heroin junkie, that broke free of that, allegedly, and went on to climb these heights in academia. It always bothered me that out of all the places in the United States that he could have chosen to go and get a doctorate from, he decided on Washington State University. I don't know, maybe he was looking for a fresh start, because if you look at criminology PhD programs, there's 3 alone in Pennsylvania that you can get a PhD in criminology. Yeah. The northeastern corridor of the United States is like the home to some of the,
a ton.
Yeah, like northeastern that's in Boston is considered to be one of the leading places in the country. What is it that was so special about Washington State? What is it that would drive you to travel all the way out there, several thousand miles, to go to that location and fly it into the side of the mountain as soon as you get there? Because he had arrived in the summertime. Okay, he had not even really done a semester, and he got a position as a teaching assistant.
He was fired from that too.
And he was, because of how abusive he was, particularly towards female students, allegedly.
Interesting.
And it makes me think, who was it there at Washington State? Because
you're good.
Okay, it's one thing for an individual to get a master's degree, all right? But when you go for a traditional PhD, particularly in something like criminology, most of the time you're going there to study under someone. Like ultimate Socratic method, you're sitting at their feet and you're learning. What academic font was he going there to sit beneath? That he was going to spend, because if you've ever talked to anybody that's in one of these like really intense PhD programs, it's like indentured servitude. We'll put a roof over your head, we'll feed you, we'll give you a little bit of a stipend, but you're going to work, you're going to work. You're going to work hard. You're going to have to teach all of my classes. You're going to have to grade all my papers. You're going to have to advise all of my undergraduate students. And oh, by the way, you got to do your research for your PhD, and you got to take your PhD courses, your core courses. He hadn't even made it through his first semester, and his ass gets fired. Why? What was it that happened that burned it all to the ground for him? And from an academic sense, why is it that he would go through all of this effort and target that location out there to go and study there? I have no idea. I've often wondered, did he have an awareness of somebody out there before he ever left Pennsylvania? I don't know. I don't know that that'll ever, it doesn't have to be any of these victims. Was he going out there for something else that had piqued his interest, for instance, that would drive him all the way out there as opposed to staying closer to home? I don't know. Maybe he just wanted a new start.
As a part of the gag order, though, we don't have any details on what detectives have uncovered digitally and things like that, yep. I imagine, right? Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what his, internet history was and the things that in the years leading up to that he did. Was it something so random where, he found Maddie online or something like that and just is a sick fuck who had some weird obsession?
I don't know. Yeah, and if not Maddie, maybe somebody else that, was his driver to go out there and study criminology at a doctoral level, or was his driver something else? You look back at like him creating these questionnaires even before he became a PhD student, asking these guys that had committed these horrible crimes that were incarcerated. I wanted, and they're very detailed, Julian. They're things like, what were your thoughts about leaving the scene of the crime? Did you think about leaving anything behind? What were your plans, going into it? Did you have a plan going into it? And, retrospectively, you look back at this, and this is really, really dark stuff.
Yep.
When you begin to think about it. And again, I'm taking this from the perspective of a college professor thinking about, well, if you've got a student that's asking these questions, what's the impetus behind it? Is it you're a burgeoning killer, or is it you truly have an academic interest in this?
Yeah. It gets so weird. There was in the Amazon documentary about this, mm-hmm. which was not the one you were in.
Right, I was in the Peacock one, yeah.
Yeah, the Amazon one is where they pretty much...
The James Patterson one, yeah.
Yeah, they do it strictly from the perspective of the victims' families involved and tell the story that way. But they put in there the people who ran the Facebook page about this. I don't know if you saw this.
No.
But the administrators of the, Mystery of the Idaho 4 Facebook page back when he was on the run had a character show up in there, an account called Papa Roger.
Mm-hmm.
And who was the 2014 serial killer? Roger, what's his name?
Yeah, the kid, what's his name? Can't remember.
Elliot Roger. Yeah, so... This was interesting for a litany of reasons because, first of all, when Kohberger got caught, the Papa Roger account disappeared from the internet completely. It couldn't be found. Secondly, when you look at the profile picture that he used, it was almost like an aged AI,
mm-hmm.
or cartoon of the side of Kohberger's face.
Yeah.
If you look at, if it's not perfect, but it's very similar. Has the last name of a killer that he was educationally linked to studying at DeSales. He was very interested in Elliot Roger and the stuff he had done. And Elliot Roger, he had killed himself before, he got arrested, but he had killed, I believe he had targeted all these women in California back in 2014. And it stemmed from his anger and hatred of women for rejecting him. So he was like an incel type.
Mm-hmm.
And it is sinister to look at the posts that Papa Roger was putting on the Facebook page while Kohberger's on the run, because a lot of it, almost word for word in some cases, overlaps with the very questions that Kohberger was putting into his questionnaire of the previous killers when he was, quote unquote, studying it. And the inspiration I don't even think you should call it that, but the ideological drawing upon he seemed to do with the naming of that account being Roger, and then looking at the nature of the crime, clearly targeting a female out of some sort of weird sexual rage and anger in all likelihood.
Yep.
Also probably because he was rejected in an incel or whatever. It is really, really sinister.
It's very dark. It certainly is. And, you know, people will take the term incel, and trust me, I was not as familiar with the construct as I am now in the wake of Kohberger. But the problem with the term, I think, is first off, it's not a psychological diagnosis. You can't go into the DSM, the diagnostic manual, and find a diagnosis of being an incel. All right, there might be components that are contained therein, and I've found a lot of pop psychologists that are out there that throw the term around. They should know better, by the way. And I think that, again, that goes to they don't have any other way to kind of categorize him, and that's kind of the easy default position. It's almost like getting closure, you know, where we're avoiding, I think, many times with this idea of incel-like behavior, whatever that means. You know, they'll talk about issues of misogyny, you're walking away as a man, you're isolated, you share common views with other people that have, quote unquote, walked away. And I'm really wondering if we're missing a broader maybe diagnosis or an examination of him and his behaviors, because this is not something that he suddenly decided to participate in. This is something that has been a lifelong journey towards. And maybe he has that commonality with other people, I don't know, that have perpetrated horrible crimes. Maybe those things do exist. But I think that the one thing that should be learned from Kohberger is to try to understand what the genesis of his turning into this thing that he has become is or was, just like with Elliot Rodgers perhaps, but just like with the Nashville shooter too, where, you know, the manifesto, I think, has now been released. I'm not really sure who can keep up with all of the manifestos that are out there. But is there any kind of common linkage between any of these people along their journey? I think that we need to be very careful in using that term because, again, we're not really getting to the heart of the matter here with Kohberger. It's going to bear a deep dive into his familial history, the impact that his raising. I've heard a couple of people say, well, he was impoverished. He grew up in really bad poverty. I'm thinking,
what?
There's a hell of a lot of people who've grown up. I grew up in partial poverty.
That's also not true, I don't think either.
Yeah, and so what does that even mean? You know, what is it that is in his guts? What is it that is in his DNA, literally and figuratively, that would drive him, you know, to do such a crime? And that's I think that's one of the things that always keeps people coming back to true crime, because they see how horrible these things are, and I think some people want to know, do I know anybody that's capable of doing this? Am I capable of doing this? What would be the motivator for someone wanting to snuff out these lives? I don't know.
When you're dealing with someone who's clearly, and I'm just using a broad term here, is way more complicated and probably worse than this, but clearly sociopathic in nature, it's like, how much can you even get to that snap point where you're like, oh, that's where it shifted. Now, it's easier when you can spot something where something horrible happened in someone's life and then talk about people who knew them and the behavior that changed. Those ones can tie together pretty well. But when it's more of a slow burn or something like that, or something that's developed over time, and there's some other factors in the personality around it that help drive you towards that type of end route, it gets really difficult to ever know the truth,
It
you know?
does. And look, this person's often cited, but if you look at Dahmer, Dahmer goes back to, he allegedly committed his first homicide when he was a teenager, beat the kid to death, and then discarded his remains there in Ohio. They went back. And of course, his dad had famously, and look, I guess on its surface, if you're a scientist, there's nothing wrong with this, but him and his dad would go out and they would find roadkill and they'd take it back to the house and dissect the roadkill together and to study anatomy, these sorts of things. His dad's this brilliant scientist. And then how did Dahmer develop over the years? Well, we had said, earlier that Kohberger's a junkie. Well, Dahmer was an alcoholic, all right? But just because you're a junkie or an alcoholic doesn't mean that you're going to go into a house off campus at the University of Idaho and completely devastate these kids and their families.
Exactly.
That's not an indicator of anything at that point in time. I don't know that we'll ever know the full depth and breadth of it.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.